Hi, and welcome to this unit's first lecture on culture. Culture is a really kind of complex and deep concept that refers to the set of beliefs and actions that define the way of life of a group of people. So this really encompasses most of the things that you do or believe, the ways you dress, and so on. But it's not absolutely everything. There are a couple of things to be clear about when we talk about culture. We're not born with culture, so culture isn't a biological thing. That is, the fact that my hair is brown is not a part of my culture. It's a part of my biology. At the same time, if I was from an ethnic group that mostly produced blonde people, biologically speaking, but it was part of the culture of that group to dye their hair brown, then my brown hair would be a part of my culture. So there's kind of you kind of got to keep your eye on the ball when we're talking about culture. Some things apply, or some things count as culture, some things don't. So if we're not born with culture, we learn it from family, from friends, from the media, from other sources, which isn't to say that we always learn it consciously. Sometimes we pick up these beliefs or these ways of doing things or these types of things that we build. Sometimes we pick them up unconsciously. For instance, you probably don't remember ever really learning to speak because speech, language, when you're an infant, is one of the things that you just kind of pick up. Not to say it's not a long road learning to speak like an adult, but when you're 2 years old, you probably don't set out to learn English. Other things, when you're different times in your life, different sources of culture are going to be the most important. So when you're really young, for instance, your family probably is where most of your cultural knowledge, most of the culture that you pick up comes from. Once you get to be in, say, elementary, middle, high school, you start to get a lot more culture from your friends. When you watch a movie, listen to music, all these cultural artifacts. That is, a song, for instance, is produced, is a cultural production, but it's also a transmitter of culture. So things both represent and extend culture. One important limit on culture is that things that are just our personal tastes don't count as culture. That's kind of your personality. For instance, if I hate mustard, that's not really my culture. That's just my personal taste. Unless, of course, I guess I come from a large group of people who all hate mustard with kind of some fanaticism. That'd be kind of weird. So when we're thinking of the extent of culture, it has to be shared with the people around us. It could be beliefs again, actions. When we talk about the products of those actions, which we'll be speaking about shortly, those count as well. How big does a group have to be to count as a culture? Fair question. And it's kind of a gray area. It's a sliding scale. If you talk about, say, French culture. France is a big country. It's got 60 million people plus or minus. That's culture. But within France, there are, say, northern French culture, southeastern French culture. Within those, once you start to get to smaller groups of people, maybe groups of people who don't even know each other but communicate over the internet or something, you could talk about subcultures, smaller groups, like maybe all of the Goths in southern France. You could call that a subculture. When we talk about culture, it might make sense to kind of divide it into two general areas. Material culture, the physical representations of culture, include things like food. So if scrambled eggs is what my people, my broader group eats, for breakfast every morning, You could look at a scrambled egg and say that's part of my material culture because it's a thing you can touch and eat in this case. Clothing, the way the stuff you wear, very much material culture. You think of the ancient Romans wore togas. They would have thought you looked really weird in your blue jeans. But the same thing goes for what happens if you dress up in a toga. You're kind of dressing outside your culture, and people are going to think you're a big weirdo. Arts. You could be talking about paintings, our representation of the physical, material, culture of a group. Things like sculptures and so on. What matters is that they're physical, tangible objects. Technology. The cell phone in everybody's pocket. That's part of our material culture. And this is an aspect of material culture that is relatively new. It definitely didn't exist, say, when I was growing up. If you've got a video game system or something else, that's part of your material culture. Architecture, so the way that people build either, say, two-story brick houses to live in, or, caves that they deck out with animal skins, or stone arched giant churches, or tree houses made of wood, bamboo, what have you. That's the material culture. The other side of the divide is non-material culture, things that are less the products of a group of people and more the way that they think, the way that they act, the things they believe. So religion is a classic example of a non-material cultural set of beliefs and set of actions. People's language, which is another very, very strong kind of piece of people's identity and of the way they express themselves, communicate with each other, is part of culture. Now, maybe you're part of a subculture again that only speaks Pig Latin or something like that, and in which case that's kind of the language of your subculture. You could be just part of a subculture, youth subculture in the U.S. right now, for instance, that uses particular sets of slang words that your parents or your teachers don't understand. Non-material culture also includes things like the way people interact or gender roles. For instance, in the U.S., maybe 70 years ago, it was very much expected in I would say most households that there would be a wife would stay home and take care of the house, would take care of children, would take care of food and that kind of thing. The man would go out and work a job outside the house, would bring back money that they could supply the house with. But now those gender roles have changed over time, so that they're much less. They're much less set in stone. And you can compare gender roles across cultures too. I think definitely, if you look at, say, the role of Russian women in society, is different in a lot of ways than the role of women in American society and American culture. You could talk about political beliefs. The American South is, and we talked about this, it's a cultural region that is predominantly conservative in terms of its political beliefs. You could look at, say, the West Coast. Political beliefs on the West Coast are much more liberal or progressive. So this is another way that we talk about non-material, intangible things. Other values in ways that aren't necessarily that don't have to be political. Like, what do you believe in? What's important to a large group of people? Is it artistic expression? Is it, say, the ancient Greeks would have said that honor and fortitude and manliness were the most important values, whereas I think a lot of people from outside the culture, I certainly ran into this when I was overseas, would point to American culture and say that the most important value in American culture is wealth, is getting rich. Whether that's accurate is a fair question, but these types of values are an important part of non-material culture. All right, that's a lot of thinking. So we'll call it at that, and I will see you in class.